Are we live? Oh, now we are. Hello and welcome to the 6th of July in a large part of the world, probably the 7th of July in Australia and Asia. Backdrop CMS community meeting. Today we're going to talk about forms, ranging from the contact forms, which comes by default, through to the module web forms and all the little submodules that can help you with that, and also look at the more advanced case using node forms for outward facing for visitors to submit contact and how you can do that. So my name's Martin. I'm a developer in Northeast England, the United Kingdom. And if we go to Justin next. You're muted, Justin.
I muted while you were talking because I was afraid I was going to have barking dog. Anyway, Justin Kaiser. I am a developer in Muncie, Indiana. I work for a nonprofit. I work with Drupal, WordPress, and Backdrop websites.
I'll go ahead. I'm Tim Erickson, St. Paul Tim on the internet. Instead of my usual place in Deerwood, I'm in Minnetonka, Minnesota, and I have my chaotic background here. Working from the putting green. I don't know if you can see that. Anyways, yeah, that's it. Andy, are you available for a quick introduction?
Yeah, I'm Andy Shillingford in the Cayman Islands, Doc Wilmot on the internet. I'm a backdrop, yeah, backdrop, Jesus Christ, I need to get some more coffee. Andy, backdrop member, and I hang around in the issue queues and try and help these days as much as I can, though I haven't been helping as much as I used to. So glad to be here.
Okay, I don't know. I go ahead and start the discussion. So we were brainstorming topics a few weeks ago, and I think, Martin or Justin, do you remember why this particular topic came up? I think somebody was asking about it in Zulip at the time, or was there some?
I think it was just about where there's common groups of modules that it was worth doing a bit of a deeper dive to, and suggested forms and covering the different types of forms. And there's often things that people maybe just use the things out of the box and don't realize there's other ways of doing things.
Sure. Anyway, so, and I think somebody had asked like around that time about forms and the ways to do it, and because there are a few sort of I think some of us have our little hacks or tricks, things we like to do. It seemed like a good thing to talk about, and we've been using these community meetings kind of as like user group meetings, a chance to record discussions on content that would be valuable to site builders or site architects using Backdrop. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. So this is the Google Doc that we're sort of using, and I'll make some notes here, but I think the three primary types of forms, and if people have other ideas or forms that they want to talk about, let us know, because there's probably other ways of doing these things. But Webform is a very popular module that has a lot of contrib modules. We were just counting, there's like, I don't know, at least 10 to 15 like other contrib modules that enhance or extend Webform. We have the contact form module, which is built into Backdrop. And there are some pros and cons. We were talking about how some of us tend not to use that and use other things instead, and we can talk about why. And then node forms, are often used by editors, but I was pointing out to some of the group that I've had some use cases where it's nice to give to allow regular users, either unauthenticated or more likely authenticated users, the ability to create nodes, kind of like they might a blog or something. And it's actually not hard to do, but it's not always obvious that you can do that. So we can talk a little bit about that. I wonder if we should switch the order and start with contact form, because that's the most basic form that's right there. And I did, before we started the session, I went to backdrop.org and went to the demo backdrop button and use this create
Backdropcms.org.
Sorry, thank you. Backdropcms.org, and created a demo sandbox really quickly. It only takes about 30 seconds, and it's something we can play around and experiment with. And out of the box, one of the things that actually is a little bit, some people might forget about the contact form module because, and I forget this, it's not enabled by default on backdrop.org. So you have to go to the list modules. And here, let's do a search for it, contact. So there, I've enabled it. And the other thing is, I think once you've enabled it, it doesn't just show up anywhere. What you have to do is create a menu. So the sort of minimum configuration for the contact form is enabling the module and then adding a menu item. Can I get to the menu here? No, it's probably best I just go. So we're gonna go structure, yes. Why am I forgetting where menus are? Right here.
Structure menus.
Structure menus, just a brain mistake. And I'm going to, well, maybe somebody can correct me, but I believe the path is contact. You know that this was in the past, figuring out the path actually was part of the challenge of getting this enabled for me. Let's see if that worked. It did, yeah. So the path is /contact, and then you have a contact form. So that's kind of a really basic form. As we were talking about right before we started, one of the disadvantages to this form is that it doesn't store the data in the database. When you just use the default contact form, it simply sends a copy to whoever is designated, which, by the way, where that doesn't happen here, I think we have to go under configuration. There is a, is it system?
It's under structure.
Yeah, right there, structure, contact form. And under settings, is this where we decide, where do we determine, or does it automatically go to the?
I think it must, I think go to configure there, and that you've got the recipients there.
Yeah, there it is. So if you're in the contact form, you can create different categories on the contact form, and then for each category, you say who it goes to. That's where the recipient is, and that's. I mean, I think in terms of configuration, that's mainly it. You can also grant permissions. This is administer, use. Right now, this doesn't give permission to anonymous users to use the site-wide contact form. Does that mean they can't use it?
By default, you have to add it in. So.
Oh, that seems interesting. Okay, yes. This is the same site in a different browser when I'm not logged in. So that link is not there. Apparently, we have to give everybody permission to use it. And now, if I go here, I assume that will show up. Do I have to clear the cache?
I have to clear the menu cache.
Well, I think I cleared all caches, so. Yeah, there it is. Okay. There would, if we had more than one category, there would be a drop down where you could pick which category, so that would determine who it gets sent to. But I assume that's not visible because we just have one.
And there is There is also a contrib module called Contact Forms that kind of splits. So if you have multiple categories, it splits them off into separate forms with their own path. So before I discovered using Webforms for this, I used that, which gave you a different path for a different form.
Okay.
So if you do want to use contact forms, that can be a useful module to use.
Okay. Can you? There's no customization, is there, in for fields?
No.
In the form module, you just get a default set of fields. So if you wanted to add a field, you're kind of out of luck with contact form. Then you have to go to web form, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the contact form it's a very simple, useful module, but the disadvantages to it are from my perspective, are one, that it doesn't store the data in the database. It emails the information to the designated recipient, and then the information is gone. It exists only in that email. So we'll look at web form in a minute. Does rather than me talking all the time to somebody, sure. Anything else about contact forms? I think that's it. Huh?
I think that's all.
There's two things. One question though.
Yeah.
Does anybody know why it's like this? Is there a reason why it doesn't store? Because that's always seemed like a strange thing to me.
I agree. I don't know why. I would speculate that that this was like in Drupal 5, and just that feature was never added, probably. And my guess is people thought that with web form available at some point, that they didn't need to add it into this because people had that option. I don't know, but I don't know the history, but I do know it came from Drupal, and it was the same way in Drupal. I think our contact form is a little bit better than the Drupal 7 contact, built in. I know I added this path to the description because I had trouble one time trying to figure out where to put the link.
Right.
You'd also think that
Should we create an issue to store contact form?
I'm sorry, say that.
Is it worth creating an issue then to store contact form data?
I think there might be an issue for that already, and I'm guessing that the debate would be whether or not we need to do that given web form. But it's an interesting discussion, and if there isn't an issue, yeah, you could certainly make one. I think it's a real weakness to not have contact form stored in the database. So,
and just
There is,
I mentioned, I noticed, I used to know about this module in Drupal called entity forms. You don't have that on your list. I don't think it's been ported, but it's probably worth mentioning as well.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask the same thing, Andy, which was if somebody familiar with it. I know I have looked into it in the past for Drupal. I have also, I think I went looking for it in Backdrop once and realized we didn't have it. But I think entity forms is really, so let's go ahead and talk about the web form module. And does somebody else want to, Martin, are you prepared to talk a little bit about it? I can.
Yeah, can do.
I haven't added it to this. I'm going to go ahead and you start talking, and while you're talking, I'm going to add it to this.
So web forms has been around in Drupal. Actually, one of the main developers was Nate Lampton, who's also one of the founders of Backdrop. But it's been ported to Backdrop, and it's used by a lot of people. You can see there we've got 895 installations. So the numbers that you see in that listing is down to how many sites connect and ask for updates. But it's a good module, and once you've got that module installed, there's a number of other contrib modules that support different aspects of web
It's the
form.
third most popular module in background.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, these are all the contrib modules that are related to Webform that extend it.
Yeah.
So one of the things about Webform module is that it Dr. Lobon brought up entity form, and I think the reason that the entity form came into being in the Drupal 7 sphere is that Webform does not store the forms as normal Drupal entities. It's my understanding that, well, I don't even want to try to describe how it does it, but it has a very quirky way of storing the form data in the database, which is not like other modules. Are Webform fields available by default to views, or do you need something like this module?
So Webform Views Select allows you to use views to populate your select boxes in Webform. I think by default things are available in views.
Right. That may be built into the module, but it doesn't. So Webform stores the data different. So I think entity form came into being in Drupal 7 and down the road because some developers wanted a more traditional way using the normal entity system of storing the data from Webform. So they created this entity form module, and I guess we don't have that for Backdrop yet. But the thing is that Webform comes with so many integrations and features that would have to be rebuilt or supported in entity form. I think there just hasn't been a demand for it yet, but there certainly could be, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it may be that some of the things with node forms will touch on it, though. There's people who deal with sort of a wide range of entities. But I've just checked, and the Webform module itself does actually use views to show the results.
Okay.
So it's definitely involved.
Where do we create a new Webform?
Okay, so if we go, so what we can, there are two ways. So out of the box, Webforms creates a content type called Webforms, where you can do it, but you can actually enable it on other on other content types. So let's say on this page you wanted to add reviews about something, you click Webform and enable the functionality.
Right.
So if you can click there and enable the functionality.
Okay, let's maybe do it on posts.
Yeah.
I think I can sort of see. I remember this now. This always kind of tripped me up a bit.
Yeah, so you enable it, and then you go and create a post.
Do I go to? That's right. So you make it on an individual post.
Yeah. So this is the thing that can be can be a bit tricky, and the web form itself is linked to a node, and it's part of that node record in the database. Now there are ways, the web form share module, which I'm maintainer of, you can actually take a web form that you've created on a Yeah, so you don't
Where do
you
I-
don't do it on there. You actually create a new node.
Yeah, but I was doing that and I didn't see anywhere. So I go to post.
So create the node. So create it first.
Test post with form. Okay.
Yeah, and
I
then
have to
just
save it.
Yeah, you have to save it, and
That's
then you
weird.
get the web form,
Okay.
and this is where you can add components.
Yeah, this is really kind of quirky.
Yeah,
So this is one of the powers of Webform, though, is it has its whole set of fields, and you can create very custom, all kinds of settings for each type of field.
yeah.
And
And you also get conditional fields out the box. So
right.
one example you might want to do is you might do a question that says, how do you want us to contact you? And if they say phone, you ask for a phone number. If they say email, you ask for an email address. That's one example, but the sky's your limit in terms of what you want to do with conditions.
Sure, there we go. Yeah, so we could do, let's try that. How do we do?
They might want to select
would be,
options.
Select options, add, and we'll just do phone and email.
Yeah.
Phone. Email. We'll make the default email.
And you might want to, and that should be radio buttons. If you don't select, as long as you don't select multiple, it should come as radio buttons.
So now we would have a phone field.
Yeah.
And we're gonna just do. There is a. I know.
Yeah, there's
There's
a
a custom
phone
module.
field that you don't really notice it on desktop, but on mobile it will pull up. When you click into it, it'll give you the it'll give you the right interface to enter a phone number rather than a regular keyboard. But that's I think it's Webform telephone. I think is the module.
There we go. And I've quickly created a conditional that says, how do you want to contact us? If that equals phone, then the phone field is shown. I assume that means it won't be shown if that's not true.
Yeah.
So save condition.
Conditions.
There we go. And we actually can see this if we click on phone. Very nice. This is, I find this really annoying that default, the default assumes that you have a multi-page thing. In most cases, you don't. I wish we would change the default. But if you go to form settings, you just have to change this. I think it's in form.
Yeah.
Progress bar. You want to turn off the progress bar if you don't have more than one page, because it's silly to have a.
I know there was a discussion about it, and the maintainer wanted to keep it in line with the Drupal 7, but I wonder if that will change when Drupal 7 goes end of life. If we can,
anyways, so anything, I mean, that's some of the basics about Webform. Anybody do anything? Martin, I asked you before the meeting if you use any of the other contrib modules. Are there other Webform contrib modules that you would recommend that you use?
So there's Webform Views Select, which allows you can create a view of, say, different items, and you can. One of the powerful things about this, I think, is you can even depends on what node you're on, you can filter it, so it can use that context, but you can I think it can anyway. But basically, you can use a view to drive your select boxes. You don't have to manually enter them all in if you're already getting the data from somewhere. So that's a really useful one. Let's see what are the other
Sure.
key
So
ones. We mentioned the web form telephone, which I think is a really handy one. And I'm also going to give a plug to a module that I maintain, which is Webforms Share. Now, we mentioned before that the web form is tied to an individual node. With Webforms Share, you can set a web form on a particular node. You can set that to be the default for that whole content type. And you can also export that web form in JSON format and import it elsewhere. So
like on a different node type or a different node?
you could do it on a different node type, a different site. You could develop your web form on your local, export it, and then import it on your production. Because one of the things about web form is that they're part of the node record. So unless you're moving the data, unless you're copying the database from one place to another, and if you're doing it in a development environment, you normally take the database down from production to development, and you don't do it the other way except when you're first setting up a website. So if you then want to develop web forms and you want to deploy them, that's a way that you can do it. It's worth also mentioning that there is quite an extensive, if you don't mind getting under the covers with under the hood and looking at a bit of code, Webform has quite an extensive API that stands for Application Programming Interface, which means that you can, using what we call hooks, you can write very simple little custom modules that do specific things with your web form. So one that I often use, Webform by default collects the visitor's IP address. So I just created a little module. There is a way to turn that off using the confidential mode, but I could create a small custom module just to strip that out. So which is quite handy where that's needed for privacy, if you don't want to be collecting someone's IP address and storing that in your database. So there's lots of things that you can do with just little custom modules if you're wanting to do it, but a lot of them, they tend to be very specific to individual web forms, so they don't really work very well as contrib modules. But what else?
So,
Web form telephone, I do recommend you use that if you're collecting telephone numbers, simply because it makes it work much better for mobile users.
yeah, I think Webform Civi CRM is something, if you're using Civi CRM, is going to help you integrate Webform with that. This looks like it creates a PDF of your web form.
Yeah.
web form count, this just allows you to limit the character limit and gives UI feedback to the user to tell them how many characters they have left before they hit their limit.
Yeah.
I'm just skimming through. There's, I think some of them web form autocomplete seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, there's Webforms Select 2, which is
A different kind of select box.
Yeah.
For the web form registration, I think this is actually pretty handy. I think it's an integration for the registration module, which lets you use a web form instead of the other way to do that. That's probably a different topic. It might be a good topic. But anyways, there's browse through and look at these. We should, I wanted to point out that we just added a web form to a specific, like a page. So one thing you can do is you can create a page and put a web form on it. Now that web form is specific to just that page. What I like to do, there is a web form content type, as you mentioned, and I find it less confusing unless you need sometimes you want to be able to add a web form to a post or a page, and that's totally legit. But usually when I'm making web forms, they're their own thing. So I use that web form content type, and I recommend that. And then you create a different content or a different node for each different web form, and then you find all your web forms in the content menu. You can go to web form and you'll see them all here. I find one of the things I find confusing is, let's say you add a web form to the post, because you have one post and you want to add a web form to it, so you enable it on all your posts. The frustrating thing about that for me is that every time you open a post, for your editors, there's this web form tab, which most of the time isn't being used, and I think is confusing for editors. Unless they are actively using the web form thing. So I don't like that.
One other thing it's worth mentioning is that you can you can generally embed web forms in blocks using the existing content block type. And that's quite a common use case where people might put a web form at the bottom of every every web page. So they've got a contact form, or they might put it in the sidebar for feedback. There's no limit to how you can do things, and it's a very flexible module.
Any other sort of web form hacks? We're almost out of time, so we should move on to the. But web form, I think, is the big one, so it's worth spending the most. Any other hacks or recommendations, Justin or Andy? Okay, so the last thing that we talked about in our agenda, or the last thing we had, was just node forms. And to talk a little bit about node forms, and by node forms, what we mean are when you're creating content, right? If I'm creating a page, this is the node form. Now, this form looks very different, right? Because I'm an admin, and editors oftentimes see when they're creating pages or posts, they have this same kind of form. And I wanted to talk briefly about like how to customize these forms, and also something that's really easy to do, but I think not obvious, which is how to give. What if you wanted? I set up very quickly the case of a story. So let's say we want to allow anyone that's unauthenticated to submit a story to our website, not to publish it, but to submit it. And we could give them a web form, but we want to be able to publish and treat these stories as regular content. So rather than creating a web form, I can create a story content type. I can go down to the permissions and just give anonymous users the ability to create nodes. I I don't even know how they could edit them, because I don't know how we would know which ones they created. So I did not give them the ability to edit their content, but they can create it and submit it. And then I changed the publishing settings so that the default is save as a draft. And I also promoted it by default just for this demo. But the idea now is that having done this is the same site, but I'm not logged in right now. I'm completely unauthenticated. And I go down here, I've added a little block that just links to the node form. I click on that and we see the node form. It's not in its, not in the admin menu, but in the regular menu, because unauthenticated users can't see it. And I can create a demo story node. Oops. With test content, and I can save it as an unauthenticated user. Obviously, there's spam implications here. We might want to put some spam protection on that form. Ooh, why is that form? Oh, this is our web form.
Yeah.
I got confused. I was thinking this was the story form. This is the web form we created, which is published and now showing up because it was promoted to the front page. We should probably delete that. But anyways, my new story node is not being displayed. If I go back now as an editor and I go to the content tab, we'll see the demo story was submitted by an anonymous user. It's not published. I can just click on this. I can publish it. I'm going to want to save flush the cache. And now if we go back to the front page, there's my demo story. We've just published it, and now it's regular content. So anyways, as I was telling the other guys before we started the video, I was really excited when I figured out how to do this. And it wasn't as obvious. It's very simple to do, but it wasn't completely obvious to me that I could do that when I was first working in 777. And very excited when I figured out how to do that to let, particularly the most obvious case I think would be to have like logged in users that you want. Well, just if you want to give you want to create kind of a blog, the ability for anybody to submit a story or a blog post, right? You can just give them permission to any registered user to create but not publish a story like this. I think we're almost out of time. We mentioned beforehand, I mean, another thing to talk about that comes up from time to time is how to customize a node form for your editors. So if you have a long, complicated form with lots of fields, none of our samples do. But if you had a really long and complicated one and you wanted to edit them, how do you do that beyond like the classic case I've run into is I might have a lot of really simple questions, and they take up a lot of space on the form, and I'd love to put them in columns, right? And it would be nice to be able to apply a layout to a node edit form, and I don't know of a simple way to do that in Backdrop right.
I'm not sure.
You could use field groups on the node form, though.
Yeah. Oh, I think you've frozen, Tim. Oh, yeah, field groups is a good idea, Justin. Oh, we've lost Tim.
Yep, he's gone.
Yeah, so there's field groups. There are a number of modules you can use, but yeah, I think it's one of the things we were discussing before we started, that node forms you can't always do. what it is. And the other thing we mentioned, that in Drupal there is a module called entity form, but we don't have that yet in Backdrop, so it hasn't been ported yet. It does look like quite a big module, so that's possibly why. If hasn't been a big enough need, and no one's felt the need to port it. I think as it's at the top of the hour, we should close this community meeting. So our next community meeting is in 2 weeks' time, which will be on the 20th of July in most of the world, and 21st of July in Asia and Australia. And that will be on upgrading a Drupal's. I think there will be a demo, maybe even more than one demo, on upgrading a Drupal 7 site to Backdrop. So that will be the community meeting in 2 weeks' time. So join us for that.